Hello and welcome back to ATA's EconChat, hosted by the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I am your host, John Humphreys, and what we do is every week around this time, Tuesday, 7 p.m. Queensland time, 8 p.m. New South Wales, Victoria. Work it out yourself for the rest of the country. Every week around this time, we get together and have a casual, interactive chat about the week that was in economics and politics. So casual, as in this is unscripted. I have a few ideas of what to talk about, but we just go wherever the moment takes us. And interactive in that the chat rooms are open. This is streaming live to YouTube and Facebook on several different channels. And any comments you put in, I will see them live as we go. I'll be doing my own rant occasionally, but at the end, I will quickly go back and check. I'll try to keep an eye on comments, but I'll also go back and check to see if there's any gold ones that I missed at the end, and we can go through those time permitting. So please do write something in the chat. Let me know you're there. Have a chat with each other, ask questions, make criticisms. Feel free to disagree, and we could have a discussion, have a debate. We can invite you on. Can I also ask you, if you're there now listening or later, please like this video. Please give this a like on YouTube or Facebook. Or Rumble, and please follow us. Please follow the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, and you can also follow my personal channel, and you can find us on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and most other places where you find streaming videos. So thank you for all that. The first thing I wanted to touch on, small thing, but we did have this event, just a little bit of history. We had this event last night, and I thought it was a great event. There was a White Elephant Stampede book launch. Amanda Stoker came and said a few words. David Gratian, one of the editors and co-authors, came along and said a few words. We had a few drinks, a few snacks, a bit of discussion, some arguments. Good fun was had by all. This was held in Brisbane. The Australian Taxpayers Alliance does have our main office in Brisbane, and this is where we host events occasionally. We will be doing these more often going forward, so please try to get along if you can. And thank you for everyone who did. So that was a good event. I just wanted to bring this up again to give an extra shout out. This book, White Elephant Stampede, good book, buy it, but it's published by Connor Court Publishing. And Connor Court Publishing is one of those few places who actually publishes people who think like you and I. So if you've been into a bookstore, you walked around a bookstore looking for the politics books or the economics books, and you will see a range of books ranging from hard left to centrist and back to hard left. And those are the options you generally have in a bookstore. Connor Court Publishing is the one small pushback we are doing in this space. So if politics is downstream from culture and reading matters in culture, then Connor Court Publishing is doing good work. I've just got a note here from my streaming platform saying that this stream may not be working. All right. Well, apologies if you're watching on that stream. I believe it's gone. I believe we've gone down. We are still on YouTube and on some other channels. So if you were watching on the ATA's Facebook channel, then it looks like we've lost you. I wonder if I can fix this. I don't think I can. All right. I will stop distracting you all then with that. So great event, Connor Court Publishing. Check them out, Connor Court Publishing. You can find them online. They sell lots of books, lots of worthwhile authors. Please do have a look. So the news of today, I know I normally start by pointing at the latest stats. And I will get to the latest stats in a second. But I did want to start by just noticing, thank you, Shy Speed, appreciate it. I just wanted to start by noticing what you all would probably notice, interest rates are up again today. So interest rates in Australia have been raised 0.25% or 25 basis points in the jargon, up to now 3.1%. So those will all be passed on. You will see them in your savings accounts or more likely your home loans shortly if you have a variable home loan. And this was widely predicted. And if you've listened to the show before, you would have heard my rant saying the problems we've got at the moment, the problem is inflation. Raising interest rates is an appropriate way to deal with inflation. Unfortunately, look, I'm a homeowner too. I've got a mortgage. I don't like it, but I've got to abstract from myself and talk about what's good for the country. And If you've got runaway inflation, which we do, then tighter monetary policy and higher interest rates is an appropriate response. If you want to get angry, and you should, the place to look is not the policy today, it's the policies from previous years. So we've had monetary policy has been too loose for too long. The central bank has printed too much money. Colloquially speaking, they don't really print much money directly anymore, but they've created too much money. Now, too much money is chasing too few goods. That creates inflation. And what we need to do is not have that sugar hit of too much money in the first place. That's the solution. This is the difficulty in so much economic policy, is the benefits or costs aren't immediate. They come a few years down the road, right? So bad monetary policy you get away with in the moment, but then you create the inflation we're all stuck with now. And that's, there's no way around that now. There's no escaping it. The bad policy has been done. We have to pay the piper. And good policy as well often pays off in a few years' time, which can be hard to sell right now because it needs to be a politician today making the brave decision to do the right thing, even though the benefit only comes a few years down the line. But so if you're upset about current monetary policy, you have every right to be. Remember, the mistakes were in previous years where interest rates were too low for too long, creating this bubble, creating this inflation, creating the warped expectations that everyone has. One thing to note on this, thank you, Melissa. Just let me know that the Facebook feed looks like it stopped at 3 minutes. Although I think, Melissa, you're now watching on YouTube, so you've worked your way over, so I appreciate it. I don't know how to fix that at the moment. I'll go back to the Facebook gods after this live stream is finished. On interest rates, they got to 3.1%. Most commentators expect they will go up further. The Reserve Bank has hinted at that in the new year. They don't meet in January, but they meet again in February. Some estimates they'll go to 3.6 or 3.85. Look, that's probably right. But I just wanted to note, as I said before, the interest rates are going up because of inflation. And the inflation is caused by the fact that interest rates were too low for too long. We created too much money. So when we want to look at what's going to come into the future, it's worthwhile keeping a close eye on how much money is being created now. So the current problem was caused by creating too much money. And so I want to bring up a graph here showing, this is showing M1, which is a measure of the total money stock, but this isn't the stock, this is a flow. This is how much M1 is changing from year to year, measured in every October, because it's the most recent data point, and just going back every 12 months, showing the annual change in the money stock in the economy, measured in billions of dollars. And you can see here from around just after 19, so in 20 and then 21, we saw a massive increase in the amount of M1. And you would think if you understand that inflation is caused by too much money chasing too few goods, well, here is the too much money. That's what we're looking at there, the period, the big jump up at the end, too much money chasing too few goods. And that was inevitably going to lead to inflation. But note at the end, this is the interesting part. We've seen increased interest rates, the unfortunate necessary action to get this under control. But note, it seems to be working. Look at the last number down there. The rate of increase in M1 has significantly decreased. Now, they're still creating more money every year, but that isn't inappropriate. It's appropriate to create some amount of new money every year. But that level is coming back down to more reasonable levels. So it looks like, I know it's been a lot of pain for a lot of people, the interest rates going up. It looks like it is starting to work. It is showing up in the monetary statistics. We would expect then, if theory holds out, that inflation would start to subside. And if that happens, then we may be seeing the end of the interest rate increase cycle. So it may take a bit longer. If inflation stays stubbornly high over the Christmas break, you may see interest rates trickle up a bit more, but it looks like the end is in sight. The end is in sight for the interest rate increases, and hopefully the end is in sight for this inflationary spike. And that would be a very good thing if we can get inflation under control. So I just realized I'm on the wrong page here. Let me get the right page up before I share my screen. Yes, Nick, short and sharp tonight for the 3 minutes. I don't know if you've managed to work your way over to over to YouTube or another channel. We are still going. Yes, well, I mean, the Queensland government can't be accused of being too fiscally responsible at the best of times. So continuing to roll, spend good money after bad on more vaccines. We may come back to that later, but I did want to get onto this this topic. I like to have a bit of a look through the stats. And there's something, I'm not going to do a deep dive on one stat that's come out this week. I wanted to look at a bunch of the stats though. And I've got them all up here. This is what we've got. This is the new information that's come out since we spoke last, right? So we spoke last Tuesday, obviously, a weekly show. And in that week, we have information saying that new capital spending, new data saying new capital spending in Australia is down. Retail trade is down. New home loans are down. And the value of dwellings, the value of property in the country is down hundreds of billions of dollars, 5% over the last couple of months. Mineral and petroleum exploration investment is down. Company profits is down, I think, 13%. And net exports is down. So we can start to see a bit of a theme forming. And it is getting to the point where we can start reasonably talking about the coming recession. Now, you know, the future is difficult to predict because it hasn't happened yet. So it's a bit of a mug's game to predict the future, but this data is starting to add up. It looks like we're trending for some stagnation, hopefully not stagflation, because hopefully we can get the inflation under control, but it looks like we're trending for some stagnation and perhaps a recession in the near future. So this is not a pretty set of data coming through. Now, one of these pieces of data that came through was I told you that the net exports has gone down. You can see that here. Balance on goods and services has changed by negative 11 billion. That's this number here in the last quarter. So you can see it's another part of my narrative that I was just building about everything going down. But there was the headline that came out with this piece of data that loads is that the current account balance is in deficit. And the current account balance has, I think, deteriorated to its largest amount in any one quarter. And look, people are going to talk about that, but I just wanted to, I was kind of painting a picture of doom and gloom, and I'm not rescinding that. I'm not taking it back. But the economics lesson for this week is to do a bit of a pause on the concept of a current account deficit. The current account deficit is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, this is my guess on this is the word deficit sounds negative, and a budget deficit is generally a negative thing. There's lots of places where a deficit is a bad thing and debt can be a bad thing. So they've got a negative connotation. I think maybe starting with D, it's just something about it brings up dread, perhaps. It is not necessarily true that a current account deficit is a bad thing. A current account deficit could be caused by the fact that Australia has so many good investment opportunities that foreigners are lining up to invest in Australia. We've got so many good investment opportunities that all Australian savings combined can't fund them all. And we've got more and more good businesses that want to get started, and foreigners are willing to lend us that money. That is a net capital inflow. Net capital inflow is a capital account surplus, which is the same thing as a current account deficit. A current account deficit equals a capital account surplus as an identity. I'm not saying it's kind of similar, sort of similar. I'm not saying it kind of matches or it's an analogy. It's not an analogy. It is an accounting identity. That the capital account surplus, the money flowing into the country on the capital side, equals the current account deficit, the money flowing out on the current account side. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing either. So it's really a misleading thing to look at. What you want to look at is what makes it up. So if we've got a current account deficit because our government is irresponsibly borrowing far too much money and they're borrowing from foreigners, that's a bad thing. If we've got a current account deficit because our business sector is doing so well that they need an extra injection of capital and there's not enough savings in Australia, that's a good thing, right? If we've got a current account deficit because our export industries have all fallen in a hole, that's a bad thing. So you need to unpack it and work out what's causing it, and the aggregate statistics can't give you that. So that's the little economic lesson for today. Don't be spooked by people saying current account deficit. It's not necessarily a bad thing, although it's certainly something to keep an eye on. All right, going forward, this is the rest of this. By the way, this shows you the decrease in the value of the dwelling stocks in Australia. You can see coming down from a max of 10.2 trillion. Now we're at 9.7 trillion odd. So some $500 billion coming down off the value of dwelling stocks. To be predicted somewhat, the property prices did seem unsustainable. Interest rates are going up. We're entering potentially into a recession. You might predict something like this. So the rest of this was the business indicators. The company gross operating profits fell by 12.4. I think I said 13 earlier, not quite right, 12.4%. You see wages did increase. Of course, inflation has also gone up quite a lot. So wages are trying to keep up with that inflation. Somewhat understandable. It's probably not the indicator we need to look for to see whether we are trending towards a recession or not. So what are we to do about this? You've got something of mixed messages that I'm giving you. The first thing I said was interest rates are going up, but they're supposed to go up. They should go up. We needed them to go up because we have inflation. And then I point out that it looks like we're trending towards a recession. Both these things are true. Some people look at the coming recession and they say, quickly, we need to drop interest rates. This would be a mistake. The only thing that monetary policy can get right long-term is stable money. Monetary policy is not a good tool for trying to create growth. Monetary policy is not a good tool for trying to create growth. It is only really a good tool for trying to keep money stable. And currently our money is not stable. It is inflating far too quickly, and monetary policy should be aimed at fixing that. Now, having a recession is not a good thing. We want growth. We want solid growth. But the only way, and if you've listened to me before, you'd have heard me say this before, I repeat it a lot, the only way of getting sustained growth, sustained prosperity is through productivity reforms and enhancing productivity growth. So if we search for growth, if we try to achieve growth through printing money, through just pumping money into the economy, it'll work in the short term, right? You'll get the sugar hit and it'll build the costs. And in 2 years' time, we'll have inflation higher than ever and another recession, and it'll be bigger than ever. Right? Eventually, we have to be responsible, or the policymakers need to be responsible. We can't just keep having sugar hits to try to get through the day. So that's coming recession. I think it's likely, but please do not interpret that as a license that the central bank should start printing more money and dropping interest rates. That's the wrong interpretation. They need to follow through on fixing inflation, and then we need productivity growth. We need a productivity agenda in this country. And I've talked about this before plenty of times, and I'll talk about it again. One of the things we need is tax reform, real tax reform. The ATA, the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, we ran a little campaign to try and defend the stage 3 tax cuts when they looked like they were on the chopping board. For the moment, they have been defended, and that's a good thing. And credit, if the Labor Party is going to follow through and keep the stage 3 tax cuts, they deserve credit for that. Right? Any party that does the right thing deserves credit for doing the right thing. So hopefully we keep those stage 3 tax cuts, but that's not enough. We need to keep going. We shouldn't be having a debate about whether to keep stage 3 or roll stage 3 back. And this is what the ABC media and the Fairfax media and the Guardian, this is what I think Dave Pello calls them, the lying harlot media. They're going to frame the discussion as, should we keep stage 3 tax cuts or should we roll it back? That shouldn't be the discussion. We should definitely keep stage 3 tax cuts, and we need to roll it forward. We need a stage 4, and then ideally a stage 5 and a stage 6. We need to keep going forward. Every year, roughly every year, we see bracket creep as a stealthy, secret tax increase. Bracket creep is when inflation and wages growth pushes you into a higher tax bracket. And there's no reason why the government should be pushing you into higher tax brackets. But this is what happens with wage growth, with inflation. You get pushed into a higher tax bracket and you end up paying a higher average income tax because you're pushed into those higher brackets. And this gets the government lots of extra money. They get a lot of extra tax money because of bracket creep every year, roughly about $9 billion every year. And what we need for proper tax reform is we need to be pushing the government for tax cuts, meaningful, productive tax cuts of up to $9 billion every year. And let's keep going. So ideally, we would have index the tax brackets. Ideally, we would index the tax brackets to get rid of bracket creep so the government didn't have this sneaky tax increase that they got away with every year. As you might be able to guess, politicians don't like the idea of indexing tax brackets. Even politicians that want to cut tax, they would prefer to get the sneaky tax increase from bracket creep and then turn around and give you a tax cut so that they get the credit. Right, so you got your left-wing politicians, the sneaky tax increase that you don't notice, and then they hand it back to you in a handout and they ask for credit. And even some of the better politicians, they still go ahead with the sneaky tax increase, but then they turn around and offer you a tax cut and ask for the credit. The better policy would be just to get rid of bracket creep. Let's get rid of this sneaky secret tax increase that we suffer from every year. That would be ideal. If that's not going to be possible, then we need to be pushing for meaningful tax reform. Further rounds of meaningful tax reform that give us back our bracket keep regularly, not occasionally, not planned for 5 years or 10 years in the future. We need regular rounds of meaningful tax cuts and tax reform. And that's why the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, we're going to be looking to set up a tax and productivity summit in the new year. We're going to be looking to set up an approach, discussion papers, consultation period, and then a tax summit bringing the best minds of tax reform and tax cuts around this country together to swap ideas, to improve our ideas, and set out an agenda, a tax cutting, tax reforming, productivity enhancing agenda for the country going forward. Something that isn't talking about winding back the last round of tax cuts, but is talking about how to go on to the next step. A question coming in here on productivity growth. Is the Productivity Commission reliable? The Productivity Commission is made up of lots of people, so it's a little hit and miss. They generally are pretty good. They have a pretty good record. When Gary Banks was in charge, it was a very reliably rational organization that gave good answers, and they still have some very good people there, but take it bite by bite. Right, so you'll have to look into what they're saying on each issue. But they are an organization very worthwhile seeing what they're saying. Even if they may be wrong on an issue, it's very worthwhile seeing what they're saying on productivity. But the issue we want to be talking about, it's kind of in our name, and it's also one of the most important issues for productivity reform, and that is tax reform. Meaningful long-run tax reform. We're going to be talking about that for as long as we exist, and especially next year, the 2023 Tax Summit. I invite you to get involved. We're going to roll out more details over the coming months, and I look forward to everyone getting involved in that process and trying to improve the quality of tax policy across all political parties, right? So we hope that all political parties are going to borrow the ideas from this tax summit, and then eventually we can get them implemented going forward. All right, that's, I think, enough of the economics for the moment. Let's switch gears onto the politics. Let's see what I've got here. This is a story that I did want to talk about. The situation in, well, I guess it is changing pace a little, but I'm going to do it. Where do I go? Apologies while I get used to this. This situation that's happened in New South Wales. So the Victorian election has come and gone. Look, I do want to give just a general update on some of the politics that's been going on. But I brought this story up now, so I'll just dive into this story first. Sorry, let me just take that down. And yeah, the Victorian election has come and gone. The New South Wales state election is the next election that matters. And so attention is starting to turn to that. New South Wales state election on March next year, quite an important election. The Liberal government is in power in New South Wales, Dom Perrottet as the Premier in New South Wales. Dom Perrottet was nominally from the more conservative wing of the Liberal Party and did seem like a conservative until he became Premier. Has found it a bit more difficult to govern as a conservative since he became Premier. I don't know all the details of the intricacies of the backroom deals inside the Liberal Party, but it does seem like something has gone awry. There was a strongly, and when I say conservative here, I understand there's lots of different types of conservative, and I don't have just love writ large for all conservatives. I very much am a believer in small government. And there are some small government conservatives out there who are allies with what we stand for. At the ATA, we believe in cutting tax, cutting the size of government, cutting wasteful spending, decreasing regulations, getting the government off your back and out of your life. And in that regards, free market conservatives are fellow travelers. Big government conservatives are not. So when I say the word conservative, it can be a bit misleading. In this instance, Noel McCoy is, from all accounts, a free market conservative and someone who had the support of his local branch and seemed very likely to get pre-selected and then elected into the New South Wales Parliament. And he's been vetoed by the Liberal Party. As far as we can tell, it's because he said he disagreed with the severity of lockdowns by the New South Wales Liberal government. Now, put aside your opinion of that. Look, it's worthwhile looking into that. I think he was 100% right in what he said. The severity of the lockdowns were inappropriate given the size of the risk. As we discussed last week, the risk of COVID was real but dramatically exaggerated. It was, you take a small risk, you exaggerate it and use that exaggeration to give more power and money to the government and further restrict people's freedoms. It's a tradition going back since the existence of government. They use this trick, take a real threat, exaggerate it, and use it to give them more power and take our freedoms away. And I believe that was done across the country, and I believe it was done in New South Wales. And Noel pushed back very softly, saying that he disagreed with that. And it looks like that is enough to get him disendorsed, which worries me, because even if you think he's wrong on the issue, even if you think he's wrong, I put to you that it is hugely important that we have space for reasoned disagreement and debate in the Australian polity. Our political system has to be able to allow people to say when they disagree, and within reason, you know, polite disagreement, but by all accounts, he was disagreeing politely. And I think it is quite dangerous where we have power structures in the major parties that can basically push someone aside because they had the temerity to have some honest debate about public policy. I mean, who do we want to be discussing public policy? We need more politicians to be willing to dive into the debate, to be able to be actively interested in the discussions about which public policy is right or wrong, and to occasionally make mistakes, to get back in there, an honest pursuit of truth. We need these discussions, and I find it a worrying trend that people will be pushed out of politics for having an interest in public policy debate. So I find that a shame. I say the other arguments in here is that he's unashamedly pro-life. It seems bizarre to me that that would exclude somebody. I mean, that is a legitimate debate that people talk about. Let's talk about it, you know, honestly and openly, and have disagreements, and some sides will win or lose the disagreement. But to rule someone out of involvement in a major political party for that opinion, it seems quite worrying. So anyway, this is not the only time that the Liberal Party seems to be getting very trigger happy and shy of their candidates. The idea was supposed to be it's a broad church. I understand a broad church does not mean it's so broad it becomes a brothel, but surely reasoned debate can fit within the Liberal Party. I certainly hope it can. I think the Liberal Party would be stronger for allowing the debate, and I think the country is stronger for having a stronger Liberal Party. So we'll see. How can the Liberal Party even claim to be liberal anymore? Yeah, look, one of the difficulties we have in this country is the use of the word liberal has been so bastardized. I've discussed this in other contexts. In Europe, liberalism basically means centrism. In America, liberalism means left-wing. In Australia, liberalism has come to mean conservative or right-wing. You go back 100 years and classical liberalism or liberal democracy, it was another term for libertarianism. So this magic word liberal means everything to everyone, which makes it very difficult to know who is the real liberal. Would the real liberal please stand up? I mean, I'm quite partial to the classical liberal definition, the 19th century definition, where liberalism is live and let live, let people carve out their own lives and make their own decisions, which is kind of the libertarian understanding. But I understand not everyone has the same understanding of the word, which means we can often be speaking at cross purposes. Now, I did think that's the New South Wales election. A quick recap on the Victorian election, if you will. We talked about this a bit last time. It's the upper house that I'm interested in. I mean, Dan Andrews has won. That's come and gone. That's done. But who's going to have the upper house? It looks very likely now it's going to be the Greens plus the Cannabis Party. Now, this is showing the Greens on 2 in the new council. It's very likely to be, it looks like it's going to be 3, because this is showing that Transport Matters Party picking up 1. that's going to switch to the Greens, very likely. Although there's a chance if the Greens fall short there, it could go to the DLP or the Liberal Democrats. So that one is Northeast Metro. So keep an eye out on Northeast Metro if you're following it. But yeah, cannabis looked like having balance of power with those three. And one of the interesting ones I think we mentioned last time, if not I should have, is that Adam Somyurek looks like he's on track to take Fiona Patton's seat. Fiona Patton from the Reason Party was one of the parties who was supporting Dan Andrews with the lockdowns and the mandates and all the rest of it. Basically just another Greens party with a different name. They look set to lose their spot, potentially to the DLP. So that's very interesting proceedings. We don't actually know the final outcome. We won't until the 13th of December, which means, what is that? The next time I speak, the next time we're back together, next ATA EconChat, we'll have that information. So we'll come and do a proper review when we get to that. A bit more of the political roundup, the opinion polls, and I understand a lot of people are skeptical of opinion polls, but it is worthwhile keeping an eye on them. And they sometimes get a bit of a bum rap. The US opinion polls going into the midterms ended up being very close to accurate. So it's worthwhile. If a party is behind 55 to 45, and Labour is leading 55 to 45 at the moment, an election held today might not be exactly that, but it's hard to believe that the Liberals can win from that position. So it looks like it looks certainly true that the Albanese government is still having their honeymoon. And look, to some degree, they have been, I think. I was worried when they were elected. They haven't lived up to my fears, which is a compliment, right? So I was worried they would be worse. So maybe that could be one of the reasons. This just report from the ABC, the conversation, which is very similar to the ABC, but it's a left-wing website. They talk about that Transport Matters probably isn't going to take that seat. Then they go on to talk about, and this is one I wanted to mention as well, it's a bit of a deviation onto US politics. And I note that someone's in the chat talking about it's the US's fault. I believe you're referring to your own comment here. Liberal wasn't just bastardized. It was, yes. It's come to mean so many different things. And look, it's a nice segue for you to say it's the US's fault. Look, most things are. That's very easy. We can always just blame Big Brother. It's a nice way to live. But the US is having a very important election tomorrow, and that is the runoff in Georgia. Now, the midterms, if you followed the US election, there was a midterm election. The Republicans, the right-wing party in America, got control of the House only just by the barest of margins, and they did not take control of the Senate. They've actually gone one step back in the Senate, and this is to try to get one step forward again. So there's a runoff election in Georgia. Warnock is the Democrat, that's the left-wing party, Raphael Warnock, and he's up against Walker. Doesn't have his name there, as I can see. And Walker is the Republican, and at the moment, it looks like the Democrats are going to pick up that spot, so they will end up, if that's true, holding the Senate 51 to 49 in America, which it makes it a bit easier for Biden to govern. So that would be a bit of a disappointment, I believe. So that is the politics roundup. Was there something else I wanted to do on politics roundup? Yeah, one other thing, actually. Nice segue in for US politics. Speaking of US politics, the close election in the Georgia runoff, the 2020 election. I don't know if you guys have seen this. It's been all people are talking about in American politics, the Twitter files. So it's quite a remarkable story, I think. One of the richest people in the world, or the world has ever seen, spends $44 billion to buy a company, basically just so that he can expose what's been going on. Apparently he bought it because he was quite offended by the Babylon Bee, a satire site, being banned for a joke that was not politically correct. He's bought Twitter. He's now released the internal documents in Twitter that shows that Twitter was in close collaboration with the Biden administration, the Biden campaign. It wasn't the administration back then. The Biden campaign, asking Twitter to shut people down, to censor tweets, to close down accounts. And it seems Twitter was very happy to oblige. And there are questions about how consistent this is with freedom of speech. Now, this is a very thorny issue. Look, the behavior of Twitter, from all accounts, was despicable. I've got no time for that. I'm not trying to defend that. But this is a very difficult issue. And it's the two cliche answers are, one is the two sides of the argument. One is what Twitter's doing is undermining free speech because people can't speak freely. And that's true. And then the other response is, well, Twitter's a private company. They should be able to do what they want. And to some degree, that's true. And then the response is, oh, well, private company, why do we care so much about that? This is the reason. The alternative to allowing private companies to do what they want is to have politicians and bureaucrats tell them what they can and can't do. Now, that seems like a wonderful idea if you imagine good, benevolent politicians and bureaucrats that agree with you. But this is the trick. Every time you want a regulation, this is the trick you always need to do. This is the process you need to go through. You need to ask yourself, if I gave this power to a politician and a bureaucrat, what would my enemy do with that power? What if my enemy got control of government, or my enemy got control of the bureaucracy? And I gave them the power of this extra bureaucratic control to shut down business or to control what business allows or doesn't allow on their platforms. If I gave that power to politicians and bureaucrats, and politicians I hate won the election, what would happen next? And I hope that gives you pause. I think there's a lot of talking past each other in this discussion. Some people, I think, on the, let private business do what they like, I think they really underestimate the size of the problem. This is a massive problem. The idea that these big businesses under pressure from left-wing politicians and activist groups can shut down speech they disagree with and warp the public square. This is a serious concern. This is a serious problem. Now, we can recognize that and also recognize that the solutions are difficult too, right? It doesn't have to be either we deny the problem or if we say there's a problem, we think there's an easy solution. I think my position on this, and I think it's the correct one, is to admit that this is a massive problem and there is not an easy solution. Right? We can admit this. We don't have to deny the problem. For the left libertarians out there who tend to deny the problem and say, just let business do what they like, I think that is too blasé. This is a real concern and we should take the concern seriously. And we shouldn't belittle people who are worried. But the people who are worried, please don't run too quickly into the solution of let's give more power to politicians and bureaucrats. Because what is the solution, right? You don't like what a company is doing and people say, well, it's a private company, they can do what they like. And if you say no, they have to do. Well, who's going to enforce that? The laws you write next, are they only going to be written by you and your friends? Or are they going to be written by Sarah Hanson-Young and Elizabeth Warren? Right? The bureaucracy that enforces these rules, is the bureaucracy full of free market libertarians and Christian conservatives? Or is the bureaucracy generally full of left-wing activists and union members? So you've got to be very careful what you wish for there. That is not to deny the problem. That is simply to say that let's walk in with our eyes open. Let's not rush to something that ends up being even worse than the current problem. And this is why the actions of Elon Musk are so fascinating in this space and potentially such an important moment for the state of freedom of speech in the Western world. Because he's stepped in as a private business person to buy a platform to make it easier for people to speak, to directly, as a private individual, it doesn't involve giving more power to a politician or a bureaucrat. He stepped in as a private individual and he is pushing back and creating a little space for a bit more free speech on Twitter. And that is a fascinating little development. And this is why it is so interesting for so many people to watch what is unfolding in the Twitter space in America and the American politics. And this data dump from Twitter showing the level of political involvement. We're just about at the end for today, so I'm just going to go through and see any questions I've missed here or comments I've missed from anyone listening at home. Are Democrats really left-wing? Their global policy, not so much. I'm not sure what you mean by their global policy. Feel free to write that in quickly, Finn, as you're listening here. I got to say, the Democrats are an interesting mix. America is the only party that there's lots of parties that have a two-party system. Right? Most of Europe used to. There's lots of small parties there, but they used to have a dominant centre-left and a dominant centre-right party. In Australia, there's three great political traditions there. You've got the conservative political tradition, you've got your classical liberal, pseudo-libertarian tradition, and that used to be the two main traditions. You used to have your classical liberals, early libertarians, versus your conservatives. That was the 19th century mix. And then you had the union movement come on board, and you had socialism come on board, and you had labor parties grow around the world, and you had a sort of a real strong leftism come on the scene. And different parts of the world responded differently to that. In Australia, the liberal or libertarian wing and the conservative wing merged into the modern Liberal Party so that they could battle against the Union Party, the Labor Party, and that's been the dynamic we've had ever since, with the Liberals and the Conservatives in a combined party. In Europe, they tended to have a Conservative Party and the left wing or the Socialist Party or the Labour Party be the two dominant ones, and the classical Liberal Party was like a centrist party that evolved as like a balance of power party. America was the only place where the socialist sort of Union Labour Party was so weak that they kept their old dynamic. They basically didn't have a socialist party, they didn't have a Union Party, they didn't have a Labour Party. They kept having a conservative-ish party versus a liberal-ish party. And the Democrats were this liberal-ish party, where liberal, still in the 20th century, went something more like what we remember. But the number of socialists in America were increasing, and they had to go somewhere. So if you were a socialist, what would you join? The Liberal Party? Or if you were a leftist, what would you join? The Liberal Party or the Conservative Party? And so leftists started joining the Liberal Party. And then I think what's happened is they've basically taken it over. So America doesn't really have a Liberal Party anymore. They just have a party called Liberal through inertia. And the Democrats have now, I think, become a leftist party. By leftist, I mean a party that prefers to have significant government control over the economy, over the society. So large tax, large government control of business, large government regulation and involvement in how business works. And that ends up being a large nanny state as well, because when the government controls all the health system, they get to control your behavior, because your behavior could be unhealthy. And when they have to bail you out from every bad decision, they can then justify micromanaging all of your decisions. So that's what I consider to be the left-wing instinct, and I think they've got that in spades in America. Finn responded here with a clarification: world policing, aggressive warmongering. Look, this is a good point. It's not obvious to me. I understand the anti-war pitch is associated with hippies and hippies with the left. I think it's more fair to say that it's the classical liberals that were the anti-war party. Through most of the last 100 years, or since the real advent of modern leftism and the growth of Fabian socialism, socialists haven't really been peaceniks. There's been a lot of socialist-led wars around the world. So I take your point that the Democrats are no longer the hippies, right? They're no longer the peaceniks. But I don't know if it's true that being a peacenik hippie is really a part of the left. I mean, it's a big part of the classical liberal libertarian pitch, and even paleo-conservatives who tend to not want to get involved in the world and just fix their country first. Neoconservatives, after all, are generally known as being pro-war. Neoconservative, that whole movement came from the idea, basically pro-war lefties, right? So neoconservative, why not just call them a conservative? Well, they're a neoconservative because they're left-wing on basically every other issue. And they just decided to switch to George Bush's party because George Bush was pro-war and they were pro-war too. So it's I don't think the alignment necessarily goes together. But yes, a good point. The Democrats don't seem to be the peace party at the moment. An earlier comment coming in from Lyndall: given that energy is a productivity multiplier, surely rising energy costs is a productivity decreaser. Excellent point. That is such a good point. Look, this is one of the underappreciated points of economic development. There is a case to be made that economic development, each stage, they reckon they're up to the fourth industrial revolution, but each stage can be correlated with a breakthrough in the availability and cost of energy. And it doesn't have to be any one particular power source we're talking about, but a breakthrough in the lower price and greater availability of energy has been associated with economic development around the world in a pretty consistent fashion. There are some that argue that those two go together because they're both caused by the sort of innovation of a free market economy. There are others that actually argue that the low energy costs is the fundamental driver, is the underpinning driving force of economic development. Now, regardless of where you fall down on that debate, in either situation, cheap energy is a fundamental part of the story. right? It is not just a sidetrack. It is not like, yes, when you have economic development, you get cheaper shoes and cheaper energy and you get richer. And it's like all part of the one story. The cheaper energy is a fundamental part of the story. And so that's a really good point you make, Lyndon. Sorry, I think I called you Lyndall before. Lyndon, that is a really a good point, and we seem to be going backwards on it now. And I mentioned before the difficulty that the costs of bad policy can take a few years to show up, and the benefits of good policy can take a few years to show up. And that means that's bad incentives for politicians. I think I was saying it before in reference to monetary policy. Bad monetary policy from 2 years ago, we are paying the price now, and we have to make responsible decisions today, even when they're hard, or people will pay the price in 2 years in the future. And this is the same thing on energy. There is no quick solution on the spot for the energy policy. We are paying the price now for years, dare I say decades, of bad energy policy. Energy policy where we have not prioritized cheap, sustainable power. We seem to we've taken it for granted. We had cheap, sustainable power, so we just assumed it would always be there. And so we let our guard down and we started getting distracted on other goals. And we sacrificed a bit of the price, and we sacrificed the reliability, and we sacrificed the long-term sustainability of our energy infrastructure. And we sacrificed them because we had some other pipe dream we were pursuing. And it is dangerous. And those mistakes of the past are catching up with us now. And the difficulty with that is there is no utopia button we can press now to fix that. I mean, the infrastructure investment we needed in energy production, it needed to have been done years ago. And if we start doing it today, which we should start doing it today, but we'll only see the benefit in a few years' time. Now, that's not a reason not to do it. We need to start being responsible and taking responsible actions, even if we don't get a payoff right now. And we need to beg the politicians to start seeing more than one electoral cycle ahead and make the sort of strong and brave decisions to do something even when they don't have a payoff now. So we should start incentivizing the investment in new power infrastructure. And if that's coal, then that's coal. I mean, we should just do what's cheap. The problem is no one wants to do it because of the political risk premium, because politicians have now made it so risky to invest in what works, because investors, quite rightly, are constantly worried that a future politician will step in and pull the rug out from underneath them. So that is a difficulty we face. My suggestion on that, I think there is a way forward. So one way forward is I think Matt Canavan has said, look, the government has made it so risky for the private sector to invest in coal. We need coal energy, so the government should do it. And I can understand his instinct to go down that path. I got to say, I am, and you'll get used to me saying this, I'm very skeptical of government-run projects. They have a remarkably bad track record. For anyone who came along to the book launch yesterday, you saw 10 white elephants there. We keep getting the government to do things. They stuff it up terribly. We say we learn the lesson, and then a new idea comes along and we do it again. But I can understand Matt Canavan's desire when he wants to do that. I mean, he has accurately described a very real problem. And if no one else thinks of any other solution, then the benefit of his solution is at least it exists. However, I do think I have a better suggestion than Matt, with all due respect. The problem is the political risk premium. Potential part of the solution is regulatory compensation. So introduce a system into Australia where if the government passes new regulations that devalue the cost of your business, that devalue the cost of your private property, if government regulation devalues your private property, they should compensate you for the decrease in value of your private property. Now, this is actually a spin-off. If you guys have seen the movie The Castle, the idea of if the government takes your property, they should give you fair compensation. Fair enough. Well, what if the government, through regulation, undermines the value of your property? Right. So that's a slightly different but related idea. This was brought to stark relief in Canada a while ago, when a Canadian local council wanted to take some property to do something with it, and they were told, well, if you take that property from that private property holder, you'll have to pay them compensation. But instead, if you pass a regulation that just forces them to do with their property what you wanted to do anyway, you can just regulate all of the value out of the property, achieve everything you want, and pay no compensation. Now, obviously, that is inappropriate. That's cheating the system. And one solution to that is regulatory compensation. If the government passes regulation that undermines the value of your property, they should pay you for it. which is only fair, right? I mean, they're passing regulation that's ruining your private property. If you had a business selling ice cream and the government banned ice creams, they should pay you compensation for the decrease in value of your ice cream business, which is fair. So one virtue of this is it's just simply fair, right? I mean, it's inappropriate for the government to steal your value and not pay you compensation. But a second benefit of this is it aligns the incentives of politicians better. Right? So politicians at the moment have the incentive that they can pass regulation and never pay a thing, right? Someone else pays the cost. They get the political benefit of looking good, someone else pays the cost. If they had to pay regulatory compensation, then politicians would be less inclined, less likely to put in place regulations so willy-nilly. And what would it do, going back full circle on the coal-fired power? I know this has been a long deviation, Lyndon, but I really enjoyed your question. What would it do on the idea of the political risk of creating new fossil fuel-based energy production or energy investments? People could make those investments now, and if a future government stepped in and introduced regulation that undermined their business, they would have to compensate. And that decreases the political risk. People then would be more willing to take the business risk of creating new energy infrastructure, knowing that if it works, they get paid. If it fails on the business case, they lose money, but that's how business works, right? I mean, that's always been how business works. If it fails on the business case, they lose money. But if it fails because of political interference, at least they're compensated. So they don't have to worry about that political risk. So that's my suggested solution on that front. But it's still going to take a while, right? I mean, energy infrastructure done now is going to take a while before we start seeing the benefit, and that makes it difficult. Absolutely, deactivist. Where is your comment? Am I getting it? Sorry, I think the internet's going a bit slow. We could make nuclear power legal. We absolutely should. It is ridiculous that we don't. It really highlights a few things. One is the argument often made on the left is that nuclear power is not affordable. Well, why do you ban it then? If it's unaffordable, if you're so convinced it's unaffordable, what's the need for the ban? Right? Businesses aren't trying to lose money. They're not going to start an unaffordable, uneconomic nuclear power plant just so they can lose money. Either you're wrong and it is affordable, in which case your argument was wrong, or you're right and so it won't happen. So what's the point of the ban? Right? So it really undermines the whole point of their argument. Right? I mean, if they really think it's unaffordable, then they should definitely agree with removing the ban, because why not? So that's one part. The other part is for people who are particularly worried about climate change. And I don't want to make this about climate change, and I've only got a few more minutes left. But look, I think the climate is getting warmer. I think there is global warming. I think humans are contributing. I think it's a relatively small issue. It's eminently solvable. It's nothing to lose your hair over. It's the climate changes by 10 degrees from day to night, by 10 degrees from summer to winter. Humans adapt. We are very good at adapting. We are not good at controlling an entire climate. We are very good at adapting when climates change. So I think climate change is real, but it's quite a small issue. It is not existential. It's not going to destroy humanity. We will adjust. We will be fine. This is very much the Bjorn Lomborg way of looking at it. It's real, but stop with the exaggerated fear. Similar to my approach on COVID, it's real, but it's way exaggerated to justify more money and power to government. Climate change, global warming, it's real, but it's massively exaggerated. I've had Facebook close down another one of these streams. I wonder what that is. Facebook doesn't seem to like me here. Anyway, that's all as by way of introduction to say, I don't think climate change is an existential threat. But if you are one of those people that thinks climate change is an existential threat, that we're about to die, we're on the cusp, as AOC said we had 12 years, and what was that, a few years ago? So we were always just about to die. But if you genuinely believe that, then of course you would accept nuclear power. Why wouldn't you? The other option, the world's going to end. But if you genuinely thought the world was going to end, why would you then say the world's going to end, but I don't want to fix it? Right? It really just, it exposes the lie in the fear campaign. If they believed their own fear campaign, they would be big advocates for nuclear. If they're not big advocates for nuclear, then they are lying, or somebody is lying, because that just does not add up. So yeah, nuclear should be legalized, and that should have to compete on its own 2 feet. And I don't know who would win that fight, but it would be worthwhile allowing it to happen. I was flicking around the last couple of comments here. Private company at the forefront of a sector, tech, that's basically monopolized the public square. It's tricky. This is in reference to Twitter. Look, the company I find quite scary in this one is Google, because they've not just got YouTube, which is a social media platform that I'm currently on, but they've also got the search engine that everyone uses, and they've got Android, which is more than half of all phones, and they also seem to have an agenda. And Facebook controls a lot more of the social media space, and they also own Instagram. So yeah, there are a couple of companies that have a ridiculous amount of power. And I think the first thing we have to do is be very honest about the size of the problem. It is a big problem. It's always a big problem if you have massive concentration of power, and we have massive concentration of power. In this case, it's private power. So it's not, as a free market libertarian, I'm normally worried about concentrated political power, but writ large, what I'm primarily concerned about is concentrated, centralized power. Now, that's normally done by politicians, but large monopolies or mega corporations can also have a lot of centralized political power or centralized power. And it's worthwhile being aware that that can be dangerous, especially if they then use that power to influence politics. You've got this corporatist structure of this unholy alliance of big government and big business, which is very dangerous. Now, that is not to say we should dive into just trying to regulate, trusting bureaucrats, but it is a tricky issue. I don't have the solution off the top of my head, but it's one to keep an eye on. An earlier question, how many people actually work at the Reserve Bank to make monetary policy decisions? Look, there's implicitly 2 questions there. I don't know the answer to either. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of people working at the RBA. How many actually are involved in the decision? Well, the Reserve Bank board makes the decision. So that's, I think, 9 people. But they're, of course, influenced heavily by many other people giving them advice. And the Reserve Bank board is not just people working at the Reserve Bank. It's also got business people and I believe a unionist. Look, I just note that it's very frustrating to see interest rates go up, but I think they've basically done the right thing up until now. It'll be interesting to see what happens next. So I think they did the wrong thing 2 years ago with too loose money. Interest rates too low for too long. But at the moment, it's quite easy to criticize them for increasing rates because we don't want it, but it's probably something we needed. All right, last couple of comments. I'm getting carried away with continuing to go with the comments, and I'm just about to hit the hour mark. So I will stop here even if I haven't got to all the comments. A journey of Fabian socialism, separate fact from fiction and fallacy. That is a great idea. Obviously, I can't do it now. I've got 1 minute left. The story of Fabian socialism, here's the short version, the 20th century. All right. So that Fabian socialism is the idea that we would get to bigger and bigger government control of the economy. We would have a large progressive income tax, and the government micromanages and regulates every industry, which is most of the Western world now. But the Fabians didn't want to get there through a revolution. They wanted to get there by democratic politics, by starting a Labour Party or a Union Party or a Socialist Party, and bit by bit getting more power and increasing the power of government. So the story of Fabian socialism is the story of the last 120, 130 years of Western history. But it might be worth doing a deeper dive on that at some stage. I can steal John Ruddock's blistery history. All right, last couple. How do we beat the electoral cycle where nation building is concerned? Oh, if I knew that. That's the $1 million question. Look, what we can do is just keep talking. The more people that get aware, the better. But it's tricky because once government gets to a certain size, its internal logic is just to grow in a way that becomes very difficult to stop, which is why the skepticism of political power that libertarians have, that I know normal people, by which I mean non-libertarians, they listen to libertarians and they hear us harking on about just decrease the government there, distrust the government there, and it sounds like we're so over-concerned about a little thing. But once the government gets to a certain size, it's really hard to wind that back. They've got the internal dynamic where they just keep growing, and maybe you like what they do when they control 10% of the economy and 20% of the economy and 30% of the economy. But once they get there, they're going to keep growing. And are you sure you're going to like what they do when they control 40% of the economy and 50% and 60%? So we've got to find some way to wind that back, and I would say try to decentralize political power to create more diversity in politics, so we can find let a thousand flowers bloom, as the saying is. All right, I'll just chuck Melissa's comment up as a comment. Yep, Europe has gone insane. And the alternative to Android is garbage. Well, which is the Apple, I guess, which is, that's what I got. But less concerned about climate change effect on humans, more concerned about the ecological effects. The ecological effects from climate change, well, I mean, the globe, I think you've actually got that there almost the wrong way around. The globe's had warming and cooling periods up and down since forever. That's very normal. Now, when I say that, I'm not denying that humans are contributing, but I'm simply saying that the globe adjusts or adapts very well to changes in temperature. What you can argue, which is what some people do, which is not a crazy argument, is that human civilization has been built on the assumption of a certain climate. And when that climate changes, a lot of the stuff we've built isn't going to make sense. And there's some truth to that. The response to that, I would argue, is that climate change happens so slowly that we've got lots of decades over which to be able to build new infrastructure. So if climate change all happened in a week or a month or even a year, that would be a big concern, because we have built so much of our infrastructure for the current climate. But all infrastructure decays, it all devalues, and it's all replaced, and it'll all be replaced over the next 100 years quite easily. And the natural environment adapts even better than that. The comments still coming in here. Oh dear. I guess I'll just stop at some point. The large governments have allowed large companies to become too large to compete with over-regulating the entire. Yeah, and look, I keep getting sucked in with these good comments. This is one important thing to note, is that big government regulates, and people think, oh, that regulation is bad for business. Big government regulation is nearly always good for big business. Because when big government writes regulation, how do they write it? They go and speak to the industry. And who are they going to speak to in the industry? The biggest players, right? They speak to the biggest players in the industry. They sit down and they say, well, what regulations are needed? And the business people, they're not crazy. They suggest, why don't we introduce regulations that require everyone to do it like how we do it? Right? They'll jump through hoops. They're already a big established player. And if they can create the regulations that they already know how to deal with, they basically make it illegal to come up with innovative ways to compete against them. Regulation always hurts the little business more than the big business. I'm going to say that again because it's really important. Regulation always hurts the little business more than the big business, and big business nearly always lobby for regulation. And that's not an anomaly. That makes sense when you understand big business and big government go hand in hand. What we want is dynamic, competitive markets. Competitive markets need fewer barriers to entry so that people can start new businesses, that lots of small businesses can thrive and compete. And look, if they do very well, they can grow and become big businesses, but they should never be protected from the competition. Right? They should always have to face the competition of new upstart businesses and that sort of dynamic market competition. And yeah, so I think that's part of the solution, deregulate and have more small businesses competing. At that point, I think we're going to pack this one in. Love the name, ATA. All right, appreciate it. And the last comment for Lyndon, look up Simon. This is just for everyone to look at. All right, I'll let everyone see that as they do. So I'm going to stop going through the comments at this point. I see more comments coming in. I appreciate it, but I have to stop at some point. I've already gone over the hour mark, so I've already got carried away. So I will, at that point, say thank you for joining me. Please give this a like wherever you are. Please give it a like. Please give it a share. Please find us on YouTube, on Facebook, and follow the Australian Taxpayers Alliance and my personal pages, John Humphreys, on YouTube, Rumble, and everywhere else you find videos. Thank you for tuning in. We will be back next Tuesday. Until then, stay free. Hey, DJ, what do you think of the budget?
Budget naughty.
Yeah, budget naughty.